Kia ora koutou, ko Janice Langford tōku ingoa, ko Tūranganui a Kiwa e noho ana. Ngā mihi ki a koutou katoa. A warm, warm welcome to you all. Thank you so much for giving up some time and coming and listening to this presentation tonight. It's a topic that I'm hugely passionate about. I really enjoyed doing the research last year, and I'm so excited to share these findings with you tonight. We'll dive straight in. I won't chit a chat before we get started, but there will be time for Q&A at the end. So if you want to hold on to your questions till then, you're welcome to. Otherwise, pop them in the chat and we can get back to them at the end. All right, give me a moment while I share my screen. Okay, so here we are looking at dyslexia diagnosis and really looking at the parent perspectives around that. So as we go through, you'll understand why I came at it from that direction. So let's start with a little bit of background. Dyslexia is a lot more known about nowadays than it has been in the past. And there's been research over the years showing its impact on well-being, on individuals with dyslexia, their self-concept. We know that it impacts mental health issues and causes things such as depression. It's even been linked with self-harm and suicide. And at a minimum, dyslexia can really reduce the capability of a child or a young person to reach their potential. So it's really important that we do find out more about dyslexia and understand it better. Note there the prevalence of dyslexia. We do not have national statistics collected in New Zealand. And although I would absolutely love to see that happen, Mike Stiles, you might be familiar with as a dyslexia advocate, he's petitioned the government for those statistics, but still we do not have them. And so these ones here, this indication of prevalence comes from Spelled NZ and also from the Dunedin study. In the Dunedin study, the prevalence rate was around 7%. I think we have got research around dyslexia now and more awareness, and studies that we have show, that dyslexia impacts not only the individual with dyslexia, but their whānau as well, particularly mothers. There's quite a lot in the studies around the impact on mothers. That's an impact that I've experienced myself, actually. Dyslexia really does have both an emotional and a financial toll. So, we don't have a lot of New Zealand research. It would be awesome to have more from a New Zealand perspective because, that really speaks to our context. And it's really, I think, crucial to hear the voices of individuals with dyslexia, but also with their whānau as well. As I've just explained, they're hugely impacted too. So I approached this research with two lenses, like you can see in the picture there. One lens as a mother and the other as an educator. So let me explain that first lens, the lens of being a mother. I'm mum to five boys, and so in the pictures there, you can see my five boys, and down in the bottom left corner, myself with my husband. He is an educator as well. He teaches chemistry and science at high school. Next to him, to the right, is my boy Ben, and Ben has dyslexia. And it was really around year 4 that he started to display huge frustrations. And he would come home and kind of have managed himself at school and then unleash it all on me. And I remember him saying one time, "I hate you, Mum." And it was so out of character. And no mum wants to hear that, those quite hurtful words. And so I had this instinct that it could be dyslexia. there were quite a few indications, but one of the keys was that over year four, his maths achievement really plateaued, and that was an area that he had always excelled in. And I figured it must be due to the word problems that had come in year four. Interestingly, when he was diagnosed with dyslexia, his report showed above average ability in fluid reasoning, which really has that relationship with maths, it's problem solving. And so it was interesting to see that that was truly a strength of his. He also had low phonological awareness and low vocabulary in that assessment. So I was thinking, okay, well, what am I going to do? My husband said to me, "You're the literacy specialist. He's got just a couple of years left of primary and then he's into intermediate. You need to fix him." And I thought, wow, I've been doing, the best that I've known to do. So I went searching and I found out about a structured literacy approach. I found the MSL course through IMSLE in 2017, and Ben became my practicum student. So I went into his school for a year and a half during year 5 and 6 for an hour-long session. And immediately when he understood his difficulties, a psychological burden was lifted off of him. And his teacher commented to me at the time that it wasn't just his reading and spelling that was improving, but something she couldn't quite put her finger on. And it really was his well-being. It was his psychological comfort, his increasing confidence. He wasn't comparing himself to his mates anymore and thinking he was dumb. So my wondering going into this research was, is this the same experience for others? For others who have sought diagnosis for their child, has this been their experience as well, that their child appears to have experienced a grand sense of relief? Because to me, that would really make diagnosis valuable. So that was with my mum lens. And then, I was doing this study, and the other part of it was really with my education hat on. And I had become quite frustrated in my intervention practice at the time when I was searching for solutions for Ben. I taught primary, then I shifted to secondary and found that there were learners in both areas, and I didn't really know how to help them who were having literacy difficulties. And so that's when I started doing some postgrad literacy study and did my diploma back then. And then I had these books you can see on the screen in my hands after that study. Joy Alcock's Spelling Under Scrutiny, Tom Nicholson's Phonics Handbook. And these are great tools still for our structured literacy approach, these gems we can pull out. But I felt frustrated that it seemed too haphazard. There seemed to be too many concepts and no order or rhyme or reason to them. And so when I completed that MSL course, I had better tools in my hands. I had a scope and sequence, and I had a clear understanding of what multisensory education is. But I was working with a lot of older learners at that time, and so many of them were undiagnosed. So many thought they were dumb. They'd built walls of resistance to learning, and damaged self-concept with reading failure was just so obvious. So in 2018, I founded Freedom Literacy to be able to help as many children as possible. And I thought, well, the best way to do that is through teacher education. So over the last 9 to 10 years, I've been in schools working as a literacy facilitator, raising awareness of dyslexia around accommodations, modifications in the secondary space, also doing cross-curricular literacy in the secondary space, and for the past 6 or so years, bringing a structured literacy approach into primary schools. And I've been super privileged. I've met really incredible learning support coordinators, resource teachers of learning and behaviour, and Senkos that have been hungry for more knowledge themselves. They've jumped on the learning journey. In that picture there, you can see my Ben. That was when he started his high school time, and with him is a fab LSC from Gizzy Boys, locally here in Gisborne, James, and he has really provided so much support as my boy has, gone through his secondary school years, particularly in terms of special assessment conditions, but also just really understanding him and giving him that uwhi that's been needed to help him feel confident in school. So, I really do feel privileged to have worked with educators across New Zealand and to work alongside teachers who are so passionate about understanding the science of reading and the science of learning so that they can do better. So I also have a team alongside me helping with the professional development, but also I still work in intervention. So on a Monday, I work with students who need support. I love to keep a hand in. I love working with students. And so there's the team. We also work with students, and Shani and Eunice there help with facilitation as well. So those are my two lenses, my mum lens, my educator lens. I've grown in my educational journey from being very ill-equipped to support learners with these literacy learning difficulties, and to being much more well-equipped and yet still with so much more to learn. But of course, with all of this, I needed to be very careful of bias in my study design, in the wording of my survey questions, and certainly in the interpretation of the data. I truly, truly wanted to seek out whether diagnosis matters, whether it makes a difference. So the question that I focused on, it's quite wordy, but it was to really make clear what I was after. What are parent caregiver perceptions of the impact of dyslexia diagnosis on the well-being and academic outlook of children and young people aged 8 to 18? So I think, I would have loved to have gone to individuals with dyslexia themselves and surveyed them about the impact of their diagnosis on their well-being and academic outlook. However, for this inquiry through the university, our ethics clearance was limited, so I needed to have a low-risk inquiry, which meant that I could go to the parents, but not to the children. However, as I said before, this really does impact whānau as well. And parent voice, parent perspectives are hugely valuable. So definitely valuable findings all the same. Also, I think one of the questions that came out of the survey was, why have you put that age limit around it, young people aged 8 to 18? And really that was because diagnosis still tends to happen quite late in New Zealand, around the age of 7 onwards. So I wanted to make sure that they had had some time to experience some impact. And then I just went up to 18, the end of high school. Okay. Oh, sorry. I haven't clicked through that for you. There you go. Okay. So the purpose, the significance and scope of this study was really to clarify parent perceptions of the impact of dyslexia diagnosis, and that was on both well-being and on academic outlook. I really wanted to help families, others in education, dyslexia advocates and other professionals, perhaps educational psychologists or speech language therapists, know if this diagnosis appears to whānau to be valuable or not. I really thought it could help to encourage further research around diagnosis and identification in New Zealand. I thought if the findings positively support the benefits of diagnosis, maybe then there's a bit of impetus for funding for diagnosis, because currently parents mostly self-fund that. I wondered, can dyslexia diagnosis interrupt a negative life trajectory? Does it make a positive difference to kids with literacy difficulties? So much of the current research that we have is on the impact of diagnosis on parents. There are a few that seek to understand the child impact from a parent's perspective. And in New Zealand, we have very little research around dyslexia that is could be called OWLS. Okay. A few definitions before we dive into looking at how the participants were found. It's really important when you come to research that you're very clear about what you're looking at and helping others to understand that too. And so, having spent a lot of time, probably far too much time actually, reading about defining dyslexia and various experts' current thinking about that, I am very aware that, there's a lot of different ideas about what should be in that definition and what the label dyslexia therefore means to different people. Interestingly, the International Dyslexia Association has just consulted on a new draft definition, so there should be a new definition coming out from them too very soon. But for this study, I really just opted for a simple definition. So I said that it's a specific learning disability, which is in line with criteria for diagnosis. It needs to be a specific learning difficulty, not a global or generalized difficulty. It needs to be in reading and writing, a word level encoding or decoding difficulty. So encoding is spelling, decoding is reading. And writing is in there too because dyslexia does have an impact on writing. It really impacts on spelling in particular. And so that has a flow-on effect through to writing. Of course, individuals may be diagnosed with dysgraphia as well, a specific learning disability in writing. But it certainly is a part of dyslexia, those word level difficulties. What else is there? So wellbeing was also what I was looking at and needed to define. So here I just defined well-being as physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional comfort, connectedness with others, such as whānau, and their happiness, their general well-being. I really wanted to take into account the whole person and all of those different aspects of well-being. And then academic outlook, defining that was really just their self-concept around their work, their schoolwork, particularly reading and writing, their engagement with learning, and aspirations for future learning as well. All right, so any inquiry starts with reviewing the literature. As I said, I fell down a bit of a rabbit hole with looking at various definitions of dyslexia. And last year, there were actually new articles put out by a lot of our experts who are wrestling in this space, international experts. And so it was great to be able to read their up-to-date thinking. So I looked at definitions of dyslexia. I looked at labeling dyslexia, stigma, and stereotyping. That's often a concern of educators and parents. I looked at well-being and academic outlook factors that are associated with dyslexia. I looked at the parents' views of diagnosis that were available in the research and also the views of individuals with dyslexia. And I looked at, diagnosis factors in general as well. So a lot of research that was extremely interesting, but really begged for more New Zealand research to be carried out as well. All right, so here we get into part of the method. So participants, how did I get my participants in? I targeted dyslexia support groups on Facebook and also tutoring services. And so they disseminated some of the survey out. Others were able just to hook in via a link. And as an ethical consideration, my own specialist teaching service wasn't approached, parents and whānau from there, and nor were any local groups. And that's just because I'm known in this space in the community. So we wanted to make sure that that didn't impact on any of the results. I also targeted a Māori literacy tutoring service provider in a bid to sample a more representative demographic. Of course, with all of this study, anonymity was ensured. None of the identifiers were put through to me at all. There were over 250 responses, which is amazing. So if you were one who responded, thank you so much for adding so much value to this study. With 199 valid responses, it meant I was able to do some really good statistical analysis, which was so helpful to being able to present the findings in a useful way. You can see there that of the 199 valid responses, we had 93% female who responded, 6% male, and there was 1% preferred not to state. All right, still having a look at these participants under the method, really looking at their background in education and ethnicity as well. So you can see there that 80% had a degree or higher qualification. And then our ethnicity graph there, 11.2% Māori responded, 87.9% New Zealand European Pākehā responded there. So to include responses, you might be wondering about the 250 and then I only had 199. They needed to give me enough information to be included. Some people start the survey and then stop, so they were cleaned out. And also they needed to say yes to the question, does your child have a diagnosis of dyslexia? Because that's what I was targeting. And I use the Qualtrics platform to collect survey responses. Looking at the data analysis section now, I was able to do a mixed methods survey, so I could use quantitative and qualitative questions in there to get that data out. So I used Likert scale questions. You know, do you agree, strongly agree, disagree? They were mostly 5-point Likert scale questions, and there were some 4-point, frequently, often, sometimes, never. These were paired, so I was looking at parent perceptions pre and post diagnosis. And then the qualitative side of it, there was one short answer response question. What other information would you like to provide about the influence of the dyslexia diagnosis on your child's well-being and or academic outlook? And I couldn't have that, you know, too long, too open, because I knew I would have to read through and code it all. And so it was limited to the length of comment that could go in there, but sufficient, I think. And all participants were given ID numbers. So I was able to take those short answer responses and go through and thematically code them. So I was looking through, and you'll see these themes come out and be linked in with the quantitative data as we go through the findings. So the big overall takeaway, findings were mixed. You'll see as we look through that they are mixed. There are positive impacts perceived, but there are also some negative impacts perceived around the diagnosis, and some of those need to be teased apart a little bit. I mean, one implication of this research going forward is we can look at those aspects of negative impact to see if they could be mitigated if the positives, you know, indicate that we should do so. Only one of the 199 valid responses said the diagnosis made no difference at all, but they didn't elaborate. For others, it had a very positive impact on their child, and then for others, they really felt the mixed impact. So finding number 1 here. Parents perceive a positive impact on their child through understanding of difficulties. This was a real key finding, and you can see how those bars have shifted from the dark beforehand, being very down that strongly disagree that their child understood their difficulties before diagnosis, to afterwards, really a large percentage agreeing and strongly agreeing that they understood their difficulties. So understanding was the real big key takeaway from this study. What I've done is I've tied the thematic analysis, the qualitative data in behind the quantitative data, so you can see how it goes together. So here's some thematic analysis around the theme of understanding, and this is from the child's perspective. These were some of the comments from parents. I'll read some of them and I'll leave you to read some of them. He now knows why he struggles with things, so he's gentler on himself and will ask for help. It helped my child make sense of why she does what she does, understand how her brain works and how all brains learn differently. It has empowered him to understand his brain is different, not stupid. So those are quite powerful statements. Here's some more on understanding, this time from, sorry, don't know why that's popping up again. Give me a second. All right, from parent and whānau perspective and also teacher. So diagnosis and learning about dyslexia has helped all of us. And also the diagnosis helped us as parents to understand more. Parents perceived that the dyslexia diagnosis also helped teachers to try to understand. His teachers are less frustrated that he is not achieving to the expected level and why. Read this last comment here to yourselves. So there were 43 participants who specifically mentioned the impact on their child's understanding, which is quite a large percentage, really reiterating that that finding is so key that overall, many families felt that the diagnosis just gave that level of understanding. Okay, finding number 2, factors contributing to academic outlook are largely more positive after diagnosis. So you can see again in the graphs that shift from the dark blue being quite heavy around willingness to learn to read before diagnosis, and then willingness to learn to read after diagnosis seem to improve. And also writing enjoyment. There is a slight shift there. A huge number strongly disagreed before diagnosis that their children enjoyed writing, but writing is such a cognitively demanding skill, and for our children with literacy learning difficulties, it's not surprising that it's still looking, like it is hard still. There are many still not enjoying it post-diagnosis. I just wanted to comment here that for these statistical tests, I use Wilcoxon signed ranks tests. And so the effect size here was our 0.746. So I think that just shows you that willingness to learn to read really increased so much post-diagnosis, the parents' perceptions of their children's willingness to read there. Still on finding 2, looking at the learning and challenges with school, also making shifts there. And the thematic analysis around academic outlook, really you can see there one comment from a parent. He has learned more in the term and a half of tutoring and support from the school than he did in 5 terms at school. So here's a learner being early diagnosed, has had a year and a bit at school, and has had some tutoring since the diagnosis and had better support from school, and the parent perceived he learned so much more. Read through some of these and I'll read some of them to you as well. He's more confident to try new academic things. I think it will take many years to get his confidence up. So you can see the mix in here. Still doesn't enjoy reading and writing as it is such a challenge for him. And another mixed, more negative result. Since my son has been diagnosed, I feel like his drive to learn or read or write has slowed down heaps because of the diagnosis. And this longer comment, have a read through that one for yourself. So you can see there that a lot of the positive impact of diagnosis was because it acted as a key to accessing, tutoring or after school extra work or even schooling. Some of our families responded that they homeschooled, that they would take children out of school during the day to go to tutoring and then bring them back, and felt that that was where the positive impact came from. You can also see that some found diagnosis a limiting factor, that expectations for themselves were lowered. And I remember some others commented that they felt that teacher expectations lowered as well. Okay, our next finding here was really about the well-being. And so just looking at the mix of factors contributing to well-being being mixed there as well. So whānau connectedness, friend and teacher support showed a small increase, but the really positive thing when you look at those graphs is you can see how their children felt connected. Parents perceived their children felt connected to whānau beforehand, and parents perceived that they had fairly supportive friendships beforehand. There was a slight increase over both. So a small effect size there, 0.189. And it is good to see, because these are really protective factors, whānau and friends being around our learners with dyslexia. So fabulous to see that. Let's look at this slide on well-being as well. Post-diagnosis, 68% of parents perceived their child felt supported by teachers. Before diagnosis, it was 48%. So a real shift there as well. And then after diagnosis, 59% of parents perceived their child felt more supported by the school environment. Before that diagnosis, it was at 33%. I think teachers know, we all know as educators how important relationships are to learning, and it's just vital that for these particular learners that's an area that's strengthened even more. And I know that that also the school environment, schools are under constraints, but they do what they can to create a really comfortable and nurturing environment. I would be really interested to redo this study in light of all the work that we have been doing in schools around a structured literacy approach. I was just chatting with some educators today, and they were saying their knowledge now is so vastly improved than 5 years ago before I went into the school. Sharing about a structured literacy approach. And so they feel more confident to identify those learners, and they feel more confident to say, hey, it might be good to follow this up. So things could have changed dramatically even since my survey of last year for whānau out there across Aotearoa. All right, let's have a look at the thematic analysis around these well-being impacts. Getting the diagnosis was a relief, but schools don't seem to know what to do with them. Her class teacher was not even aware that she was dyslexic. Most teachers tend to ignore the diagnosis, was what one parent perceived. Here's a specific example from one parent. At intermediate, teachers display graphs and scores for great reading or writing challenges, which when you are dyslexic and at the bottom of those lists is demoralizing and embarrassing. I think we saw in the quantitative data that diagnosis impacted favorably in the majority to gain support and shift teacher focus. And I think these words can be quite confronting to us as educators. It shows the mixed findings. There were 32% still in disagreement or neutral that the teacher was supportive, and that leads to that negative perceived impact that it's due to a lack of teacher support post-diagnosis. So, I know that many of you who are tuning in are educators, and usually people who come to these kind of Zooms are quite knowledgeable already, and you just want to increase your knowledge even more. So, if you're an educator, ask yourself, do I know how to identify and address dyslexia? Can I, through instruction, accelerate their learning, but also support self-concept, well-being, and motivation? And if you did answer yes to that, then who around you might need help with that? Who could you share those insights with and encourage them to learn more as well? I'm very big on advocacy because knowledge is so empowering. And so having a look again still at the teacher and school environment. At no stage in her primary school years was there a suggestion of dyslexia. Put into the top class at high school, she discovered in year 10 that she wasn't the same as the others. She became depressed, withdrawn, and suicidal. The diagnosis helped, able to access reader writers for exams. So, I think that corroborates the research that dyslexia does have that enormous socio-emotional impact. And so the earlier it can be identified or diagnosed seems to be quite a positive there. You can see, though, the mixed findings again. Here's some positives. MOE have been great with things like tablets, etc. And primary school has been amazingly supportive, accepting, and nurturing. So, we're seeing the variation as well. And I think that's been one of the goals of bringing in a structured literacy approach and this literacy PLD across sectors, actually, is really to help everyone understand how a dyslexic brain will learn to read most effectively, and that it's the way that we all learn to read most effectively. So really helping educators to get that PLD and knowledge. But you can see, that there is that mixture of findings. So people have had different experiences depending on perhaps the school that they were at and how well equipped that school was to be able to identify or provide that support. Secondary schools, these couple of quotes really speak to the importance of gaining knowledge and having consistent accommodations and modifications in place. I'll read you this quote. Accommodations from the diagnosis have not been kept up by the school, claiming lack of availability of learning assistance. Incredibly disappointing to watch her fade from flying high at the end of term 1 in year 13 to now wanting to leave school at the start of term 3 because of lack of support. She powered ahead in her learning and communication in year 12 with help and is now left high and dry. So, it's that follow through right to the end. And again, I have worked with so many LSCs who are working really hard to get in people to support the special assessment conditions. It's not always easy to find and train and retain reader writers, but they are absolutely vital to the special assessment condition scene. So I think some of these comments here really speak to the importance of looking at systems in secondary school. Here, some more data around well-being. So just looking at the factors being mixed again, but looking at externalizing and internalizing behaviors. So externalizing behaviors such as maybe shouting or how I describe Ben's frustrations, some aggressiveness, maybe demonstrating anger. And internalizing behaviors, maybe those Monday sore tummies or, just those psychosomatic complaints, really, where the psychological impact of the dyslexia is actually causing physical pains in the body. It could be anxiety, it could be depression, it could be being withdrawn. Those are all internalizing behaviors as well. So when we look there, you can see there was a small to moderate effect size. So that really just indicated a perceived reduction in those internalizing and externalizing behaviors. Let's look at some of the comments that came out of the thematic analysis around this as well. So knowing she had a thing helped her feel okay. There was a reason she stopped having Monday sore tummies. His anxiety and stress has disappeared. We took the dyslexia diagnosis as a positive, as it put us on the path to getting a structured literacy tutor, which led to the turnaround in his behaviour, which was remarkably quick. And also, this one here, the diagnosis has been positive for us. We thought issues were behavioural, but was that he didn't enjoy school and was not confident. So I think that all speaks to some, really having that physiological impact in their bodies. And so a reduction of those psychosomatic complaints, and then some seeing a quick turnaround in behavior because there's a path forward from the diagnosis for a support, even if that support is self-funded, and for that all-important understanding that came out in that first key finding. So additional findings from the study, parent responses came out around timing of diagnosis impacting on well-being. So one parent commented, I believe an earlier diagnosis would have helped my child. He is uninterested in learning as it is where he is seen as dumb. The label of dyslexia has helped him not feel dumb, but the excitement of learning has been damaged, and I do not believe he will ever enjoy it. And then also time to absorb or process diagnosis. My son has only recently been diagnosed, so still getting his head around this. And other research shows as well that shock and grief can be felt after a diagnosis, realization that there is a challenge ahead. So support for whānau, support for the children through that phase is really important. There can be a whole grieving process to go through, or like you saw in that previous slide, there could just be a quick turnaround and things become a lot more positive more quickly. I think we always need to remember that children with dyslexia work much, much harder and put in much more effort to their reading and writing than neurotypical children. You know, fMRI scans show brains consuming up to 5 times more energy in reading tasks than a neurotypical brain. So important that we're all aware of that. And that early diagnosis is seen as being most beneficial, really mitigating the effects of moving through to secondary without understanding difficulties. So that was a finding that came out. Also, a comment on labelling and stigma. Diagnosis means access to limited help, but also challenges with labels, fear of being different, bullying, and low self-esteem. So this is always an important consideration when diagnosis is undertaken. However, there is comment in the research that stigma often does exist, even where there isn't that label. There's just the stigma of not being able to do what everyone else can do in a classroom where being able to produce well-written pieces or being able to read well is highly valued. So there can be stigma attached without the label there as well. And then peer issues, we know that kids can sometimes not be kind. And I know schools work very, very hard. We really have core values that we teach explicitly all the time in schools. So I think it's just a part of it that, we need to keep working on. We need to keep encouraging knowledge and understanding from others as well, from their peers. I just wanted to show you about the comorbidities as well. So I wanted to know what other diagnoses were sitting alongside the dyslexia, because of my experience and in the research from experts in this space, comorbidities are the norm. It's not typical to just have one diagnosis. And so that leads to neurocomplexity, where you have crossovers between these different neurodiversities. So dyslexia, there you can see, so the percentages are on that far right side, and you can see 20.9% were diagnosed with ADHD as well as dyslexia, 5.1% with ASD, 22.6% with dysgraphia. And then if you come down to DLD, you can see there 2.3% diagnosed with comorbid DLD. And, for me, that stands out because it's an estimated 50% comorbidity rate with dyslexia. So that would tend to indicate that DLD is severely undiagnosed in this sample of 199 whānau. And also ADHD at 20.9, where the prevalence of comorbidity with dyslexia is around 40%. So that's a little bit concerning as well. And I do wonder if we're missing the inattentive type of ADHD. So more education around that for educators, but also for whānau to know what to watch out for in terms of what ADHD can look like as an inattentive type is important. So diagnosis seems to act as an empowering key to beneficial factors that can only be accessed once a diagnosis is made. Again, I'm hoping that future research is going to show that things have changed in this space, that everyone will be able to access some more beneficial factors, such as explicit structured literacy instruction, without a diagnosis. However, the research of the past and this research seems to indicate that it really is a key, that diagnosis. Parents and teachers provide key messages about dyslexia through their interactions with children and young people. So they must be knowledgeable and they need to be able to communicate accurate messages. Excuse me. I do think let's revisit this in the future. We have so much more understanding about dyslexia now than we did 20 years ago. Still a long way to go, but there are definite advances being made currently. So teachers who were viewed as having a positive impact on children's self-esteem and learning outcomes post-diagnosis were those who accepted the diagnosis and acted, showing caring and nurturing of the child's individuality. So some implications in there as well. Accommodations at secondary really contribute to greater ease and happiness with writing, and that can be in primary as well. Assistive tech is really important. It's extremely unlikely that teachers are creating barriers for children, just the same as it's extremely unlikely that children are not wanting to learn. Every child wants to learn. So I think that maybe a lack of belief in needing to diagnose or wanting to diagnose that is perceived by some of the parents might stem from our old ideological constructivist approach to learning, or a mistaken belief that supporting well-being is to just leave them to get there in their own time and own way. But the fallout from that belief has been clear in, many parents' experiences and in their voice that they've communicated to us. So I think that's something that we can reflect on and think about going forward. An effective learning environment has come out as being absolutely key. There are studies that show that teacher knowledge of dyslexia is insufficient. And like I've said, we've had the opportunity to go into schools in greater, with a greater spread in the last year or so than ever before, to share this knowledge about the science of reading and the science of learning, and what dyslexia is and how best to teach. But that has to keep going. We need to keep that going to really build that teacher capacity. Secondary schools in particular showed that mixed impact and tended to have more negative comments around the impact of the diagnosis, or that they hadn't done anything beforehand. So I think that bears taking on board and really just thinking about having an environment where there's consistency of modifications, accommodations, and special assessment conditions. And so if you're an LSC or a SENCO, that you're really on top of all those things is so important, and knowing and communicating out with teachers across the curriculum who needs those accommodations and modifications, and supporting them to do that effectively is really important too. Let's have a look. We're almost at the end, everyone. You're doing so well. Studies suggest, I'll let you read this one yourself, actually. So studies do suggest that, and this one also suggests that the label is largely positive. Some parents did say that they wanted a caring, nurturing, effective environment and instruction without the label to mitigate stigmatization. But as I said before, there can be stigmatization just because of the difficulty in itself as well. So others promote a neurodiversity view of the label, really helping others to understand what it means for the individual who has dyslexia and being able to be supportive as a result of that. So, diagnosis of dyslexia reveals a specific learning difficulty or disability. This means the child or young person will have strengths also. Often until we get that cognitive assessment, we can't see the strengths, the cognitive strengths and weaknesses, because it is a specific learning difficulty. There will be strengths there, and it's really good for us to see what those strengths are. For example, even a child who, in the past, you could get a dyslexia diagnosis with high IQ and then low word level reading difficulties. And so now that is gone. So learners who might be generally fairly average can also be diagnosed with dyslexia, but that could mean that maybe a strength of theirs is at the 36th percentile or the 42nd percentile, but for them it is still a strength. It's an area that they do better in than other areas, and so it's worth highlighting, it's worth encouraging them to, lean on those strengths. So I think even the cognitive assessment itself is valuable. So that really does lead me into a look at limitations and future research. Obviously, much more further research is needed. Again, I couldn't access children or individuals with dyslexia diagnosis to hear from them firsthand about the impact. So that would be a great research project for the future. Also, it would be great to hear educator voice around this topic of dyslexia and diagnosis, and the voice of other professionals as well. I think that research looking at whether the diagnosis is really essential or whether identification and effective instruction is enough within schools would be really interesting to look at as well. And then I think research around, well, further research, there is some New Zealand research around accessing diagnosis. So at the moment, there are only small percentages of Māori in particular accessing spelled. And in my teaching service, it's a little bit higher. We're at about 40%. But even just investigating the accessibility of cognitive assessment and further intervention instruction beyond school that seems to have had that positive impact would be interesting too. And then really asking, is cognitive assessment the valuable part of this journey? Does it need to be a dyslexia diagnosis, or is it just the understanding of strengths and challenges? I mean, some talked to having the label. You've got to have something, I guess, to hang that difficulty on for some learners, but could it just be having that cognitive assessment that's valuable? So there are lots of, I have so many ideas now for further research. And I think we need, as it says on the screen, stronger Māori voice. What impact a structured literacy approach had on teacher knowledge of dyslexia? That would be so key to research. And circling now to our final couple of slides. And Ben last year passed year 12 with merit. He often jokes about his dyslexia, and he's handled it really well because he has had such a supportive school. So I'm very thankful to his high school and how they have supported him through his learning. Um, it hasn't meant that I've stopped advocating for him when I've needed to do that. And I always like to approach that with a advocating for Ben whilst sharing more knowledge, which is going to help to advocate for other learners that are in the same situation as him. So just to wrap up, um, there's my website to go to if you want to keep an eye out to see if there are any workshops or events that would be suitable for you. October is coming up very soon, and it's Dyslexia Awareness Month. In fact, I'll probably release this video in October. And I've also got little helpful snippets to release just about research around dyslexia. There are lots of myths out there still about dyslexia. So just to help with that advocacy and education, I want to put out some little snippets. So you can follow us on Facebook, Freedom Literacy, and watch out for those snippets there. Also, at the moment, we are training secondary teachers, primary school teachers, and we are training interventionist teachers in schools as well, who will be able to work one-to-one and small group with learners with literacy difficulties. So I feel it's so exciting that one of our goals that we've advocated for is having a literacy specialist in every New Zealand school, and we are starting to be on the way there. The minister announced recently that secondary schools are going to be able to have a trained literacy interventionist in every secondary school. So that's super exciting. So lots of positive things as we move forward. I think, if you're an individual with dyslexia, if you have children, whānau, or students with dyslexia, now is a more positive time than it ever has been in the past. So thank you for coming along. Thank you for listening in. Please do pop your questions in the chat, or I'm going to stop sharing and stop recording now so that we can go into that question time. But if you're watching this recording and you have questions, feel free to email or to pop those underneath the video, and I will get back to them as I can. Thank you for coming along.